gain control of the Senate, and Republicans have sought to replace Flake, who is a frequent critic of President Trump, with a more conservative voice. One thing missing from that Republican race, though, has been a presidential endorsement. You see, President Trump has not waded into the Senate race, although all three candidates use the president's name to garner support. The president has, however, jumped into the Republican primary for governor over in Florida. In a Monday tweet, Mr. Trump endorsed Congressman Ron DeSantis, praising his record on crime and border security and saying he's done a, quote, incredible job. So let's talk about this now. Joining me from Washington are McClatchy White House correspondent Anita Kumar and CBSN political contributor and Associated Press White House reporter Zeke Miller. Great to connect with you both. Feel free to jump in as I throw these questions out, although I'll throw the first question to Anita. What do you think the White House is waiting and watching for in tonight's primary elections in Arizona and in Florida?
Right. Well, the president obviously is looking for his candidate, Ron DeSantis, to win the gubernatorial primary there in Florida. And this is someone he's supported numerous times, not just in the last 24 hours. He also did an event for him. In the primary in Arizona, it's interesting. There are three candidates running, three primary candidates on the Republican side who are all trying to say that they are, the Trump candidate. They're all advertising mailers and TV ads with Donald Trump, but obviously he is not endorsed in that one.
And Zeke, all the candidates in the Arizona Senate race have really embraced President Trump in one way or another. Sheriff Joe Arpaio, of course, was pardoned by the president, but the president himself has not made an endorsement. Why do you think that is?
There are a couple of reasons why, and it's interesting when you go back to this race. I mean, this primary race in Arizona hasn't been so much a campaign to win, but for some of these candidates, particularly Ward and Arpaio, it's been a campaign really for the endorsement of the president. Because in that three-way battle, the assumption has been that one or the other, they were cannibalizing votes for each other, that a presidential endorsement would boost them over the top, and that gets to why the president hasn't endorsed there. While all three have been trying to push, saying that they are. And make the case that they are the most Trump candidate in the race, or the best candidate for the president in the race. Again, Arizona is a state, particularly the Republican voters in Arizona are very Republican and fairly supportive of the president. The president's advisors have told him to sort of stay out, don't endorse Arpaio, don't endorse Ward. That would almost certainly. Potentially do McSally, who is the establishment Republican favorite, and if you look at general election matchups, would favor, of the few public polls that are out there, but also talking to consultants on both sides of the aisle, that would be the most competitive matchups for Republicans in a state they view as vital to maintaining their Senate majority this fall. So if the president were to endorse either Ward or Arpaio, who he seems most likely to want to endorse, it really could throw that seat into jeopardy. So that's why the president's aides have really been making a case. You can endorse some people in these other races, but this is the one where you just can't weigh in.
I'm just wondering to you both if there is at all a McCain factor in this. Of course, everyone now dealing with the loss of Senator John McCain, speaking about what he represented as a statesman, what he represented to Arizona, and the division between McCain and Trump is on full display, with the president has not commented directly about McCain's passing. Anita, is there a McCain factor, do you think, in people's minds as they head to the polls?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely do, but I think that sort of that McCain-Trump factor has been around for the last couple years. I mean, Donald Trump took over the Republican Party, and he's, still popular with Republicans, and McCain had gotten a little bit more unpopular as this party has split between the more establishment and Donald Trump. And so I think that's going to be a factor in that state, but I think it's a factor all over the country in these elections that are happening. I think one thing that also is a factor is the president has tried as much as he can, as disciplined as he is, or undisciplined sometimes, to listen to Mitch McConnell, the Senate Majority Leader. If he's really been pushed, to get involved in a race, I think he's tried to listen to that, tried to listen to him and get involved. He either gets involved with what Mitch McConnell wants, or he stays out. And so that might be one of the reasons that you're seeing him stay out.
Zeke, do you feel there's a level of that too, that perhaps the advice President Trump is getting is to stay out of the Arizona primary at the moment? you know, in some circles, they do consider that the president the kingmaker, considering his high popularity within the base.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I talked to White House officials about this race over the last couple of weeks because it's one we've been watching. We saw him endorse Foster Freeze in Wyoming, who was an unsuccessful candidate just last week. You know, this would be sort of the next obvious place for the president to sort of put his finger on the scale in that primary. And officials say he's been pretty disciplined, and that's certainly not for any. There's been a lot of effort, a concerted effort by the White House political operation, the people around the president, the RNC, the National Republican Senatorial Committee, to sort of explain to the president time and again why he can't endorse. And if you look at the tactics that particularly Arpaio and Ward have embraced to try to take their message directly to the president, whether it be mentioning him on Twitter, taking to Fox News programs that they know he watches, or media that they know he can see, they're trying to get around the filter, the organization around the president to take to get him to sort of goad him into wading into that primary. And so far he has been aides say he's been pretty disciplined, and now with polls closing in a couple of hours, he is not taking the bait.
I just want to do a quick gut check with both of you because I want to switch to this other topic in the news today. President Trump attacking Google this morning, accusing them of suppressing conservative voices. You had his chief economic advisor, Larry Kudlow, speaking to reporters at the White House, saying that they are looking into it. Do you both buy this as a legitimate position the White House is taking, or is this kind of more of distract from McCain-ish behavior?
Sometimes it's not a White House position. It's something that the president happens to see. He might have actually just Googled himself and was wondering what was going on. I mean, a lot of times things that are coming out of the White House are just because the president sees something and he wants to know what's going on, and his aides need to follow suit. And I'm sure that's what has happened.
But just remember, to follow up with you, Nita, do you believe President Trump is really Googling himself, or is this an advisor coming to him saying, maybe talk about this, it can really get the base going?
I think that people always think that he's trying to distract or appeal to his base, and I think that both of those things are probably true. And I think in some cases it probably is exactly what it seems at the same time. So if it could be all of those things, I think it is. I mean, there are often times that his aides are caught unaware of what's going on. It's something that he happens to say or tweet, and then suddenly it's become sort of White House policy or something they have to look into.
Zeke, what are your views on this?
Yeah, I mean, it certainly appeared to be the sort of thing that was sort of president-led, and then staff doing the backfilling to try to build the foundation for what the president articulated. But it is interesting, when the president articulating that complaint, maybe looking at the desire to maybe look into some sort of regulation of these internet companies. When one of the things the president did when he took office was roll back net neutrality regulations, and it's the lack of consistency that often follows when the president is essentially setting the agenda for his administration without a whole lot of forethought, and certainly very little staff consultations there. Right. And that really leads to a lot of inconsistencies across the administration.
Yeah, and
go ahead, Nita.
I was just going to say, let's just remember this is the backdrop of Twitter and Facebook being in the news for being accused of, exactly the same thing. So he has something to sort of say, hey, look at this context of, it's been happening, and maybe we should look at it a little bit further.
Yeah, you had Jack Dorsey admit to Twitter's left-leaning bias, in fact. And a quick question to you both. When's the last time you Googled yourselves? Tell the truth. Zeke, come on.
I did just yesterday. I'll copy that.
And Anita?
I was looking for an old story I wrote.
Yeah, I know. That's basically it. I always look up stories that I've written, so I'm generally Googling myself in some issue. All
right, the typical reporter's excuse. I, too, did it yesterday. All right, a final question to you both. We had this new report released today from George Washington University, finding that nearly 3,000 people died in Hurricane Maria. You had Governor Ricardo Rossello adjusting the death toll from 64 all the way up to 2,975. It makes it the deadliest storm for Americans in more than a century. I quickly want to have you both listen to an interview my colleague David Begnaud had with San Juan's mayor just a short time ago so we can hear what she said in response to this.
But this is not a number. It's not 2,975. And that number is just the amount of times there was neglect. It's just the amount of times that somebody turned the other cheek. It was the amount of times that this government and the majority of the political class in Puerto Rico decided to play by Donald Trump's tune and dance to his tune, rather than to speak up what you were seeing, what everyone that came to Puerto Rico was seeing, what we were seeing, that people were dying.
The storm, a disaster, the aftermath even more so, and it is now being confirmed in study after study. Can the White House stay silent about this? If not, what should it be saying?
I mean, so far they've certainly been silent. But we've asked the White House for comment on this. I'm sure other news organizations have, and the White House has not put out a statement. There was no press briefing today where that was going to be an obvious question that they were going to have to defend. This is, of course, coming out after revelations about the damage of the storm, for the response to which the president gave himself a 10 out of 10 grade. Right. One where you can't, the White House does at some point have to answer this, and this is an issue that sadly hasn't been covered enough in the press, and there hasn't been enough opportunities to ask. There haven't been enough opportunities to ask the White House questions about this one.
And Anita, what can the White House say? I mean, I know that there's a lot of Puerto Ricans who have now moved from Puerto Rico to Florida. Florida's a swing state. It has this growing Hispanic population. Republicans would be well served to hang on to as many of those votes as possible. What could the White House say at this stage?
I mean, it's really going to be a tough issue for them. And they know that the questions are coming both because of the study today, but also the anniversary is coming up in September next month. So they're going to have to say something. I'm sure they'll be prepared to say something. And I'm not sure what they really can say that would make some people feel better. It's important to remember that it's obviously the death toll is very serious, but it also translates to federal dollars, right? So some of that money, federal disaster aid, is based on, what the casualties are, and they're going to have to kind of put a number on that. I mean, some of it's just funeral expenses. I think the government pays for that or pays for some of that. So they're going to have to put an accurate picture together about that, and it's been so tough to get them to comment. I think the last time Sarah Sanders was asked, which was some weeks ago, she still stuck by that they did a good job and they did this, I think, as the president said, it was a 10. I don't know if she said that, but that she stuck by what the disaster response had been.
And I just want to bring you both this statement from the White House just released as it responds to these numbers. As we're talking about what can they possibly say, I'll read just a few small portions of it. And this is from Press Secretary Sarah Sanders. Again, this from the White House in response to these numbers. Quote, the federal government has been and will continue to be supportive of Governor Rosello's efforts to ensure a full accountability and transparency of fatalities resulting from last year's hurricanes. The American people, including those grieving the loss of a loved one, deserved no less. It goes on to say the president is proud of federal efforts to help in Puerto Rico, that it was a devastating multiple hurricanes that the region witnessed. They are focused on Puerto Rico's recovery and saying the federal government will continue to support the government there in Puerto Rico and Puerto Rican communities in their recovery from Hurricanes Irma and Maria for years to come. Zeke, what do you make of just what we're hearing from the White House now, that it is responding to these numbers?
I mean, it's good to hear, number one, to hear them addressing this report about this devastation that we all saw covered at the time. But as the case with so many of these tragedies does sort of fade from memory, and now that it is back in the news that they are now coming out and talking about it. But one of the things you didn't hear necessarily from the White House, there was a desire or support from some sort of accountability of the federal government's actions. That is the sort of thing that has drawn so much concern on the ground among aid workers, aid groups, and obviously the magnitude of the devastation of these storms leads to a certain amount of deterioration in the federal response capacity. But talking to emergency response officials, the fact that the administration hasn't sort of conducted a sort of a whole of government study of what went wrong, and clearly something went wrong if this many Americans died there. Something could be done differently. That's the sort of accountability that people on the ground, people in the emergency management committee have been looking to hear, and that's not something we necessarily heard from the White House that they would like to do.
Right, and I should just note that this statement shows that they are proud of the work the federal government has done. No kind of daylight there for a necessity for a review. Great to chat with you both, Anita Kumar and Zeke Miller, both joining us from our DC bureau. Appreciate your time today.
Thank you.
Still to come, Paul Manafort's second trial is delayed. The government plans to introduce more than 1,000 pieces of evidence against the president's former campaign chair. You're streaming Red and Blue on CBSN. So get this, Paul Manafort's trial in Washington, D.C. has been postponed. It was supposed to start September 17th, and jury selection will still begin then, but the opening statements have been pushed back until September 24th. The judge in the case made the ruling after the former Trump campaign chairman's attorneys argued they needed more time to go through the more than 1,000 pieces of evidence the government wants to introduce at trial. Now, this time, Manafort is facing charges of acting as an unregistered foreign agent. It will happen about a month after a jury in Virginia convicted him on 8 felony counts, including bank fraud. President Trump called the jury's decision a disgrace. Now, while the president continues calling the Russia investigation a witch hunt, an op-ed in the Washington Post says it's not. Washington Post columnist Karen Tumulty wrote that piece and joins us now from Washington to talk about what she wrote. Karen, great to chat with you. And we should note that, your headline was really that Manafort lost, Mueller won. What would the implications have been if Mueller didn't win this case, which we know is far from actuality because there was only actually one holdout juror that wouldn't convict on the other counts? But what was your point?
Well, first of all, it's important to remember that this, as the White House points out, was not a case that dealt with Paul Manafort's work during the time he was associated with the Trump campaign. And in fact, the judge had gone so far as to forbid anyone from mentioning Trump or Russia collusion during this trial. But the fact is, the verdict was such a vindication for Robert Mueller, his investigative techniques, the thoroughness by which he had pursued the investigation. And had it gone otherwise, it really would have given a lot of credence not only to President Trump's charges that all of this is a witch hunt, but also potentially to calls by Republicans that Robert Mueller wrap this investigation up quickly, and even potentially for the president having a pretext to fire Bob Mueller.
What's interesting as well is that it appears what you're saying is the lines have really been drawn here. The special counsel has 3 times as much evidence for its next trial against Manafort, while President Trump has been saying how much he respects Manafort and how this decision and this whole investigation is a witch hunt and a hoax. What do you think happens next here?
Well, in this particular trial, because it deals with Paul Manafort's, the allegation being that he was unregistered as a foreign agent, there is potential for it to actually come closer to the work that he was doing while he was with the Trump campaign, and also to touching the Russia investigation itself. But what you also see here is that other people who Mueller might want to be talking to, whose testimony he might desire at this point, are going to feel a lot of pressure as they see what Paul Manafort is going through here. No one is going to want to be in Mueller's crosshairs.
Now, I want to ask you about the other major topic on everyone's minds in Washington this week, the passing of Senator John McCain. You also wrote the obituary in the Washington Post for Senator McCain over the weekend and said that you actually began putting it together before we even knew he had brain cancer. Tell me about that and what the process was like just in the past year finalizing this.
Sure. Newspapers really do have to have, for figures of as much importance as Senator McCain, we do have to have something ready in case the inevitable that is going to claim all of us happens. So I had actually begun working on this obituary of Senator McCain probably 3 years ago. And you would think that writing somebody's obituary is sort of a dismal job. But the fact is, if you're doing it, as I was in this case, while Senator McCain was not only alive, but still vigorous, still writing his own story, it was actually sort of a joy to be able to sort of stand back and take stock of his life.
And I have to say, even just watching people share their memories of the late senator has been quite enjoyable, seeing some of his more humorous moments as well. You included some interesting anecdotes, many of which I'd never heard, one being that McCain used to hold his breath as a child until he passed out when throwing tantrums. Apparently those tantrums never ended. What more can you tell us about that and how you discovered it?
his mother, who, by the way, is still with us at the age of 106, would get so alarmed because he would hold his breath as a toddler until he would black out. So she finally consulted a Navy doctor who said the next time that kid does it, take him fully clothed and just dump him in a bathtub full of icy water. So that's what she did to try to control his temper tantrums. But it was sort of an early manifestation of the personality that we saw, because the fact is that Senator McCain, in many cases, it did seem that he was sometimes his truest self when he was outraged at something. He was, as his longtime aide, Mark Salter, said, always, looking for the next fight.
In a letter laying out his final thoughts, Senator McCain said that he'd lived and died a proud American. I'm just wondering what your thoughts were on his farewell statement, and if you think it really fit with his maverick persona.
The fact is that patriotism and service to our country was something that was literally in his DNA. Senator McCain had one ancestor who had actually fought with George Washington in the Revolutionary War. His father and his grandfather, he was John Sidney McCain III. His father and grandfather were the first father-son ever to have made 4-star admirals in the Navy. So this idea of service to our country is something that really was part of his destiny from the moment he was born, and certainly something that guided him throughout his life. And I think we're also seeing the passing of a generation where it was expected that our national leaders would have had some kind of wartime military service early in their lives.
Yeah, and we've been talking today just how Senator McCain perhaps represents the old Republican Party. President Trump is the present, and you only really realize what you have when you lose it. But great to chat with you about your work. Karen Tumulty, joining us from Washington. Thanks for your time.
Thank you.
And many classrooms around the country are still on summer break, but the issue of education is in session in Arizona. Months after educators flooded the state capitol in May, the teacher walkout is still making headlines. Education is a central campaign issue for candidates on both sides of the aisle. Earlier, my colleague Elaine Quijano spoke with Lily Altavina. She's a watchdog reporter at the Arizona Republic. Take a look.
The Arizona teachers' strike ended in May. You've reported on this. What was done to resolve the strike?
Right. So, a lot was done on the governor's side to resolve the strike. Governor Doug Ducey said he was going to raise teachers' salaries by 20% by the year 2020. Teachers said, that's still not good enough. But teachers did eventually end their walkout. They called it a walkout, actually, rather than a strike. But they have still decided to politically advocate in other ways, particularly in this week's primaries, in the November election. Red for Ed is on the forefront of a lot of people's minds.
And how is this issue affecting elections this year?
I think it was just such a stark image for a lot of voters. It's still on voters' minds, that image of tens of thousands of people flooding the state capitol on a school day, parents unsure of where to take their kids or spending money to put them in daycare. Some parents, I was on the ground talking to parents who were very supportive of what the teachers were doing. Others have come out in opposition of that and feel a little resentful of the teachers. So it'll be interesting to see where voters swing each way. But what is clear is that Red for Ed is on their minds, that teacher walkout is on their minds.
Well, the walkouts seem to be directly targeting Republican incumbent Governor Doug Ducey. Has it impacted his reelection campaign?
I think we'll see how that goes in the primary. He's going up against challenger Ken Bennett in the GOP primary. And Bennett actually announced his run shortly before the teacher walkout, partly because he said he saw Ducey, what he thought Ducey was panicking and flip-flopping a little before Ducey announced his 20 by 2020. So Bennett has been a big critic of Ducey's education policies, and Ducey has said he's sort of an education governor. Bennett has been very critical of that. If Bennett wins the primary, that would be hugely an education decision by voters, probably.
Well, are voters happy with the job Governor Ducey has been doing outside of the teacher walkouts?
That's unclear. That's kind of voter speculation. We'll see how Ducey's approval ratings go in the next round, but that's kind of unclear other than education.
Well, let's turn to the race for governor on the Democratic side. The frontrunner, David Garcia, has a background in education. Has that been a major point of focus for his campaign?
Absolutely. He was a big presence during the teacher walkouts. You would see him out on the Capitol. Him and the other Democrats have talked a lot about education in their campaigns. I think they see that as a real sticking point in how they're campaigning. It's unclear who will come out in the primaries.
Well, if Garcia is nominated, does he have a realistic shot at flipping the governor's mansion blue?
Again, that's hard to speculate. I think it'll really come down to parents and voters. If parents and teachers, if they come out in force and feel that red for ed, maybe, but it's hard to speculate. Arizona is a pretty conservative state, and some parents may not like that their kids were out of school for a week.
Well, since education is becoming such a hot topic in Arizona, are there a lot of teachers running in the primaries?
There are some teachers who are running in the primaries. In Arizona Senate District 14, for example, Mendy Gomez, a teacher, is going up against retired auditor Jamie Alvarez. You've got a lot of state positions that are open that some teachers are vying for, partly because they're saying, you know what, it's my time. We tried to advocate outside. Now it's time to go inside.
Well, I know you touched on this before, but how much has education been on voters' minds?
It is hugely on voters' minds. Partly because they just don't know what's happening. Even in local races, a city council candidate told me just recently that when he's been canvassing and knocking on doors, a lot of what people have been talking about and asking about is school funding, teacher pay raises. It's just unclear what's happening. And obviously a city council candidate doesn't really have the power to do anything for it. But you can tell it's just one of those major issues, and it's been a major issue in polls as well.
All right, Lily Altavina. Lily, thanks very much.
Thank you very much.
Still to come, Alan Weisselberg was the president's money man for nearly 2 decades. So what is he telling prosecutors, and why does he need immunity from prosecution? You're streaming Red and Blue on CBSN.
I've spoken to Alan Weisselberg about how to set the whole thing up with funding. Yes.
A key recording there. But before that audio of Michael Cohen and then candidate Trump surfaced, the name Alan Weisselberg was not widely known. But for federal prosecutors, it appears the longtime Trump Organization CFO has been on their radar for quite some time. Last week, Weisselberg was granted immunity in connection with the investigation that led Michael Cohen to plead guilty to campaign finance laws. He was also called to testify before a federal grand jury. In a Politico magazine article, senior writer Michael Cruz breaks down President Trump's 4-decade relationship with Weisselberg and why he could be an important asset for the Mueller investigation. Michael joins us now from Arlington to talk about all of this. And there's a reason, Michael, Weisselberg is known as Trump's money man. But specifically, tell us what information he can provide to the special counsel, not only about payments perhaps through Michael Cohen to women alleging adultery, but other business transactions as well.
Well, it's hard to say with specifics, but Alan Weisselberg is on a very short list of people, maybe at the top of the list of people who know the most about the finances of Donald Trump going back 40 years almost. The longtime chief financial officer of the Trump Organization has worked for Trump for so long that he, in fact, started working for Trump's father. So if there is literally one person that the president probably does not want investigators talking to about dollars and cents going in to the Trump Organization and coming out of the Trump Organization, it is Alan Weisselberg.
And Trump, the president himself, had said that an investigation by the special counsel of his personal finances, Weisselberg also prepared his tax returns, would be crossing a red line. The special counsel, though, has been very careful up until now as to having a very narrow and focused direction when investigating any potential offshoots from the Russia probe. What is the president afraid of?
Well, so Weisselberg, with this deal, is talking specifically about the Michael Cohen case to investigators in the Southern District of New York. So there are a number of different investigations going on, but whatever Alan Weisselberg is telling them or has told those investigators about what Michael Cohen did or didn't do is clearly of concern to the president because of the obvious Trump implicating potential campaign finance violations. So put this aside even from the investigation that Bob Mueller is coordinating right now, but generally speaking, this is not a good thing for Donald Trump, or potentially is not a good thing for Donald Trump, I should probably say.
Right. And, you know, some of the allegations and suspicions about the Trump family business is that it mirrored in many ways the mob in Manhattan, and how real estate was a great way to hide money or perhaps get investments from overseas and not have to identify who's funding your buildings and your construction. In your article, you reference a 2004 book written by Donald Trump in which he writes, quote, Weisselberg did whatever was necessary to protect the bottom line and refused to succumb to the pressures of risk. What is it about this excerpt that strikes you as being key right now?
Well, I think what stood out to me was that mention of risk. Obviously, there is considerable risk right now for not only the president, but those who have been closest to him for the longest. And Alan Weisselberg certainly is one of those people. And so he is weighing, the way that many people are weighing right now, the legal terrain and engaging the risk that they are subject to. And so they have decisions to make. And obviously, Weisselberg's decision here in this case was to cooperate with investigators. As somebody who knows both men told me for this piece, you know, Alan Weisselberg is not going to go to jail for Donald Trump. Whether or not he did something illegal, who knows, we'll find out. But even if he didn't do something illegal, he's certainly not now going to do something that would put him, Alan Weisselberg, into further legal jeopardy.
But there have been some examples of Weisselberg. Okay, look, the bottom line here is that, is this the guy who was cooking the books for Trump? That's the question people have on their minds. And there's a curious incident involving Alan Weisselberg and the president's wealth that I want you to talk about. It was when the New York Times, they tried to nail down a number back in 2005. And in their exchange with Weisselberg, some odd things were said. Can you just refresh our memories as to what happened?
Sure. So this is an anecdote that comes from Tim O'Brien, who at the time was a reporter for the New York Times and was working on a Trump biography, Trump Nation, which came out in 2005. He sat down with Alan Weisselberg, which was unusual to begin with because Alan Weisselberg has always been quite quiet and under the radar. And so Tim sits down with Alan Weisselberg and relays the fact that his reporting had demonstrated, it was telling him that Donald Trump was not worth anywhere close, actually, to what he consistently said he was worth. Sat down with Alan Weisselberg. Alan Weisselberg put in front of him a balance that added up, he said, to $6 billion. Tim did the math. It was $5 billion, and Tim pointed out the discrepancy, at which point Alan went back to his office, or got up and said, I'm going to go back to my office and find that other billion, and then never came back. This sort of speaks to a larger point that forever, I mean, this has been true forever from the 80s onward, there's always been a question about how much Donald Trump is worth, whether he's truly worth the $10 billion he said he was when he started running for president, or something much, much lower than that. And he has gone to great lengths. I mean, there are many examples of this, but he has gone to great lengths for decades to obscure that actual number, to put forth the sense that he is richer than he actually is. And so I don't know that this is his biggest concern at this point, but one thing that we could learn at the end of all of these various investigations is actually a more definitive number as to what he might be worth.
It is fascinating, and there's surely more interesting stuff to be learned. You know, one of the questions Weisselberg may have to answer is, did you ever find that extra $1 billion? Michael Cruz,
yeah, where did it go?
Great to speak with you today. Thank you for your time.
Thanks for having me.
Jimmy Carter has never been searching for billions of dollars. In fact, he's known for serving the less fortunate in his post-presidential life. Carter and his wife, Rosalind, have worked with Habitat for Humanity since 1984. In that time, they've built and remodeled thousands of homes. And at age 93, he remains active in the organization. CBS This Morning co-host John Dickerson spoke exclusively with the former president and other famous volunteers in South Bend, Indiana.
Nearly 40 years after leaving the White House, Jimmy Carter's legacy is still building.
It is nearly 94 degrees outside. What are you doing here?
Well, I'm building habitat houses.
With his wife, Rosalind, President Carter has put in 34 years, helping make more than 4,000 homes in 14 countries.
I understand that you and Mrs. Carter renovated your home, the two of you. Did you use the skills of Habitat to do your...
Absolutely, yeah.
What did you do?
Well, we contracted with a carpenter, and he didn't show up when he said he would. So we just decided we'd just do it ourselves.
Now, any married couple that's been together for as long as you have, when they do a project together, I mean, is this smooth sailing with the two of you? How does it go, Mr. President?
No, not always. Not even on the Habitat side. We've been married now, as you know, a little over 72 years, and so we've learned to accommodate one another and to iron out those differences.
Measure twice and cut once is good for carpentry and maybe for marriages.
It is.
We saw that precision up close when we joined the Carters at their latest Habitat for Humanity community near South Bend, Indiana.
There are 1,700 volunteers working here. What does that tell you about America?
It tells me that America has a great orientation toward helping people in need. It's very difficult for somebody who's well off to cross a barrier and get in touch with a very poor family who's in need and never has had a decent home. But Habitat provides that avenue very automatically.
In the process, inspiring others to come out swinging, like comedian David Letterman.
I should be thanking you for allowing me to help out and do this.
Well, thank you. Well, you've been working on Habitat for a long time, but I didn't know about it.
Yeah, we started right after Katrina, and found the experience, as you know, overwhelmingly gratifying.
He credits President Carter.
Seeing him and being here on these builds is such a lovely break from the cynicism of life, because just listen to this. It's delightful.
You're not just taking out a little tack hammer. You're down in Houston. You're in the suit, mucking out the the soggy insulation. Is this?
Yes, it was a mistake. There's no getting around it. It was a job for a younger, braver man. But yes, we were doing it.
When you're hammering, are you taking more care than if you were building something in your own backyard?
Yeah. If I screw up the hammering, that means I have to go to the claw part of the hammer and spend the next half hour doing that while everyone's looking at me. Dave, you're holding up the build, and you don't want that.
I, Jimmy Carter, do solemnly swear.
Jimmy Carter only served one 4-year term in the White House, so he never met the 5-year requirement for a federal pension. But he isn't planning on retiring. Already a former president for longer than anyone in history.
You said you thought that telling the truth was important when you were president, but you seem to suggest it might not be so important to the presidency.
Well, that seems to be the case now. I think it's well known that the incumbent president is very careless with the truth. Telling the truth has been pretty deep ingrained in me, and I think that makes it even more deplorable to me to see that it's been abandoned by some people.
What some people would say, well, that's politics. You maybe have to tell a lie now and again, and maybe even more than that, but you can succeed for your side and get things done.
I disagree with that. I think I went through my campaign and my presidency without ever lying to the people or making a deliberately false statement. And I think that would be a very worthwhile thing to reinsert into politics these days.
The current president's changed the office around a lot of different ways. Do you ever look at the presidency and say, boy, I wish I could have done that. It would have been a lot easier.
Not really. I haven't seen much to be emulated in recent months, but I'm not here to criticize the incumbent president. I just wish him well, and I prayed for him.
Where do you see hope then in today for the rebirth of America, or for the rebounding that people are looking for?
Well, it's bound to come in our country through the electoral process, and I think that America will learn from its mistakes. We don't always elect the best person, that's obvious, I think, including the time when I ran, perhaps. But I think America eventually prevails.
President Jimmy Carter there, setting the post-presidential example. Still to come for you all, it's a desert primary, but it's not quite a dead heat heading into today's voting in Arizona. The latest on the race to replace GOP Senator Jeff Flake next. You're streaming Red and Blue on CBSN.
CBS News, honored with 31 Emmy Award nominations, more than any other news network. CBS News, original reporting at its best.
You search, share, post, pin, tumble, you message, you snap, and you chat, and then you click and know for sure.
We're getting some breaking news into the newsroom. Here's the latest.
The free, easy, real news app that makes you that friend. CBSN, CBS News, always on.
Now, as we mentioned earlier, Arizona is holding primaries today in the wake of Senator John McCain's death. Voters are picking nominees to replace the state's junior Senator Jeff Flake. He has been a vocal critic of President Trump and opted not to run for re-election. We've got a team here to talk about all of this. Ed O'Keefe is a CBS News political correspondent. Welcome, Ed. Antoine Seawright is a Democratic strategist and former advisor to Hillary Clinton's 2016 campaign. Great to have you as well. And Leslie Sanchez is a Republican strategist and CBS News contributor. Welcome to you all. You're about to have a very fun night.
Long
You're
night.
prepared.
Long night.
They're almost fed. They're ready to go. I want to begin by rolling some sound for you all on what Senator Flake had to say about his potential replacement today. Let's listen.
I think McSally will win. I hope she does. That's the only shot that obviously Republicans have to hold onto the seat. But it's even difficult then. This is going to be a hard-fought general election.
So if you missed it, he's predicting Martha McSally will win tonight. Why is this race so competitive, and what does an endorsement from Jeff Flake mean to the Trump loyalists who have heard Flake go anti-Trump for some time now?
Well, he was predicting she's going to win. He didn't necessarily endorse her because he knows that endorsing her could actually be detrimental to her candidacy.
Very toxic.
And the problem, the issue in Arizona is the state's changing. And it's changing among Republicans. A Jeff Flake-style Republican, a John McCain-style Republican cannot win a primary right now because they've become far more partisan and conservative and are less eager to nominate guys like Flake and McCain, who've worked across the aisle and have really made a name for themselves in Washington doing that. But on the flip side, it is a state that is younger, far more diverse, and is seeing a real shift in its politics. And many believe, and they've been saying it like a broken record for like 3 or 4 cycles, that Democrats are going to see gains in the state this year by virtue of the demographic change, by virtue of the president, and the policies that his administration's been pushing for the last 2 years.
So, Leslie, what do Republicans need to do in this moment? Because you also have Sheriff Joe Arpaio running here, the man pardoned by President Trump, known in Arizona as just this bombastic, take all prisoners type of sheriff.
And put them in pink, and especially if they are immigrants or Hispanics.
And eat bologna in tent city.
Right.
Where does he fit in this? Is that the future of the Arizona Republican Party?
I think a lot of people would think not. And I think more so because of what Senator Flake is saying, what Ed is saying. With respect to McSally, is somebody, yes, establishment-oriented, female, though, you can ride this female wave. And in talking to a lot of the consultants and operatives on the ground there, they're quick to point out, yes, there is this shift and change, and the Democrats, I think, tend to overplay that. There are demographic shifts, but it's a very conservative population. It's still a fundamentally conservative state. It's just they do not like to see racial divides. I think that is where this fissure is, and it's not accepted anywhere within the Republican Party. So these candidates, they take this pro-Trump, but with that tone. I think that's what we're watching for. Is there an appeal for that? Fundamentally, I think we're going to swing back to more moderate-oriented voice.
And Antoine, Democrats watching this, I'm not sure who they're hoping your nominee will go up against, Kyrsten Sinema. Is there a real sense that Democrats will have a shot at this red Senate seat now?
Absolutely is. If you look at the environment as a whole, and if you go back to since President Trump has taken office, you will see that Democrats have been winning in places where Donald Trump won by double digits. You look at Conor Lamb, you look at what happened in Alabama. I think there's something like 42 some odd legislative seats that we flipped in places where Trump has been successful, or won in 16. That says a lot about the environment, not to mention that as candidates, like in Arizona, like in Florida, like in Oklahoma, tend to spend all their time and energy flirt and cuddling, playing footsie with Trump. I think that only represents a small portion of what the American electorate would look like. And I think what Republicans have to keep in mind is the people who show up in presidential preference primaries and presidential elections are a totally different crowd than those who show up in midterm elections. And when you measure things like the enthusiasm gap, you will see that Democrats are outpacing Republicans in who shows up in primaries across the country. So it will be a watch and see game. Now, the only thing for Democrats to be careful about is to overplay their hand and paint a rosy picture that may not be real.
Coming from someone who worked on Hillary Clinton's campaign, let's clarify, you're saying this from experience.
Listen, I've been down that road, and as we say in the South, there's no education in the second kick of the mule. And so I've been down that road. And so I would just caution my party.
I'm stealing that phrase, by the way.
I would just caution my party. It's a marathon, not a sprint. That at the end of the day, we cannot be the party of just anti-Trump. We have to have a message, we have to have messengers, and we have to have a turnout method that will convince voters to show up and vote for us.
I do want to switch and talk about Florida quickly, but Ed, I want to ask you about what you think the McCain factor is here. There's talk about just McCain being the old Republican Party, but he's representative of morals and standards and country above individual gains. Is that on Republican voters' minds, do you think, as they head to the polls right now, or is that something for a later election?
I think that's something for later this week, and there'll be a lot of intrigue around who succeeds him as the placeholder, which is probably going to be announced at some point next week. But look, Flake has operated in very much the same way as McCain. The idea that you can find ways to work with the other side of the aisle, that the country is changing, therefore Republican politics have to adapt as well. But people are furious with him about that. And it was his turn. Well, certain elements of the Republican Party certainly are upset about it, yes.
For standing up to the president.
For standing up to the president, for pushing for bipartisan and comprehensive immigration reform that doesn't start with building a wall and end with building a wall. And for just generally understanding that the state is changing. But mostly, I think, especially in the last year, for standing up to the president so boldly. He did it with
just having a core.
Well,
just having a core and being principled. Forget about party, but putting the country first. Because I think everyone is so drunk off the notion that we have to be this extreme in order to be successful, when at the end of the day, for a very long time in this country, the most successful politicians, the ones who've gotten things done legislatively, the ones who've left office on a high mark, are those who've been able to navigate Washington but also work across the aisle to get things done. Unfortunately, Trump's posture and his tone has jammed Republicans up who normally would be in that vein. That's no longer the case.
Well, speaking of the president and the value of his endorsement, because it is gold in the Republican Party right now, in Florida, you've got Republicans hoping to turn one of the state's Senate seats red from blue. Governor Rick Scott hoping to beat out the incumbent Democratic Senator Bill Nelson. Scott did get an endorsement from the president via Twitter yesterday. Right. Does he need it? Does he want it? Considering how popular he is in Florida and how good of a job many see or say he's doing.
It's interesting. I was speaking to some Florida Republicans who did not vote for Scott just because they don't like Scott. You know, he has his own baggage. That's what you have to think about. So this may be a mixed message. What we've tended to see, whether they held their nose and accepted the endorsement or wholeheartedly embraced it, it did have a positive effect for the most part in the most recent elections, having that support from the president. That's going to be the takeaway we're going to listen to tonight. If the president's, kind of political push at the end via tweet or whatever it may be does continue to hold, then you're really seeing a message within the Republican Party that they have to stand by the president.
This is Trump's party.
This is Trump's party. And the term that I heard today is that, today in Florida we'll see if Trump has hijacked the Republican Party. And that's the term. They think of it as a hostile takeover.
And the real challenge for Scott, starting tomorrow, is does he continue to bear hug the president the way, or does he continue to allow the president to bear hug him? Or does he try to put some distance between them? Because indisputably, he is running for the Senate because President Trump wants him to. Because Republicans understand he's got the money and the name recognition in a massive state with multiple media markets to do it. But you're going to run in a state where the president isn't wildly popular like he is in other places, and where ties to him could conceivably trip you up. And it's the same issue in the governor's race. Ron DeSantis, the congressman, who went out of his way to appear on Fox News every open hour of the day in order to win his attention, got his endorsement. He, too, will be fully embraced, has been fully embraced by the president, and has to decide, will that work in a general election or not? Democrats would wager it doesn't, right?
The Donald Trump sword cut both ways. It may be attractive in the primary, but in a general election, it will probably be the biggest liability in the state like Florida that could ever be. And it's the same problem Democrats had in 2010 and 2014, right? Do you want the support of Barack Obama? Do you want the support of what comes along with what Barack Obama has done while he's in office? Well, there were some Democrats who ran full steam backwards away from Barack Obama in the midterms when he was in office, and you have the same thing on the Republican side. The difference is Donald Trump's numbers have been on life support since the day he's taken office, and they have not gotten better. And the more he says, the more he does, the more he tweets, the more he meets, the more toxic he becomes when reasonable people have to show up in a general election. And so for
Republicans, you could also say his numbers have found the base. They haven't really sank any deeper than they've been. They've had a great consistency.
But you have to think about it this way. Is the base enough to get him across the finish line first, and the candidates too? Because Trump may limp across, but he also may leave some people behind. And the goal for us as Democrats to make him the political boogeyman of this cycle.
In the interest of equal time, Leslie, I'll give you the last word on that. How are you seeing it?
I'm going to watch these people like Adam Putnam, who is somebody who's been running for office since he was basically born, and now the president has endorsed his more Trumpian candidate, with DeSantis, and where is that going to fall tonight? So we're going to see the power of that influential tweet.
All right, guys, get comfortable. You'll be here for the duration as the nation watches to see if there are real national implications to what we see happening here in these primaries. Antoine Seawright, Leslie Sanchez, and Ed O'Keefe. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it. And that does it for this edition of Red and Blue. We will see you back here Wednesday at 5 p.m. Eastern. But of course, stay with CBSN as we continue live coverage of the primaries in Arizona and Florida late into the night. We'll have more news for you after this short break.